Welcome to Educate, Agitate, Organise Saturday, a joint endeavour between Don't Leave Organise and Socialist Telly. I'm joined this week by my co-host, Kathy Augustin, also from Don't Leave Organise. Kathy, who have we got on this week?
We have two wonderful campaigners local to me in Oxford, Jabu and Mark from the Oxford Living Wage campaign.
Fantastic. Let's go to the interview. Oxford has one of the highest average salaries in the UK and a world-renowned university that has 6.1 billion in total funds and endowments as reported in 2018. But these figures mask the stark inequalities that exist in the city. Oxford is the least affordable place to live in the UK. According to reports over the past few years, the average house price has increased to over 385,000, which is nearly 11 times average earnings. The average rent for a one-bedroom property is just over £1,000 a month. A few miles down the road from the obscenely wealthy colleges, people find it hard to get by every day. Homelessness is escalating, and the gap in life expectancy between the city's poorest and richest has risen to a shocking 15 years. I'm really delighted to be joined this week by two prominent organisers from the Oxford Living Wage campaign who are going to talk us about the reasons behind setting up the campaign and the equalities we've just mentioned and how they're tackling those. Delighted to be joined by Mark Ladbrook, who is a lifelong trade unionist and campaigner for rights in our workplaces and equality in our communities. He's one of the founders of Oxford Living Wage campaign and was recently elected as the national chair of the Socialist Health Association. Mark, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Mark is joined by Jabu Nala Hartley, who is chair of Oxford and District Labour Party, which covers the constituencies of Oxford East and Oxford West and Abingdon. She's a former tutor with the Oxford branch of the Workers' Educational Association, and Jabu is chair of the Oxford Living Wage campaign and recently elected to the National Council of the Socialist Health Association. Jabu, really pleased to have you here.
I'm pleased to be here.
So, look, I'd be really interested in finding out. This is a really important campaign. In some ways, it's similar to campaigns we've featured on this programme before. I'd be interested to know, how did you go about building the campaign and what were the key challenges to setting it up? Jabu, I wonder if you could start.
To be fair, I would have liked Mark to answer that one because I joined the campaign when it was already set up. So my joining the campaign was more or less from a worker's point of view, where I've lived in the city and I have seen the despairing inequalities in terms of the wage gaps and the gaps between the rich and poor areas. So naturally, when I was invited to come and join the Oxford Living Wage, it was absolutely crucial for me to show my presence in this campaign, especially my background, which was a South African background. My mother was a trade unionist. So I understood the importance of fighting for a decent living wage for the workers.
Mark.
Okay, if I can say something a little bit about the history of it.
Yes, please.
The living wage was originally set up by the Oxford City Council some 12, maybe 13 years ago. And they set it over in the course of a couple of years at 90% of the London living wage. And the logic behind that was, as you say, there were very high living costs in Oxford, but actually the transport costs weren't quite as high as London. I mean, we can debate this, but we won't for the moment, okay? So it was set at 90% of the London living wage. And the council paid its own staff this Oxford Living Wage, and it paid staff in the leisure centres and the major contractors that it dealt with. It paid them the Oxford Living Wage as a minimum. And that means, for instance, if you go into the city, you will find sometimes some of the litter pickers who you see on the streets are paid more than the staff in the swanky restaurants and perfumeries and so on in Oxford, because of the fact that we've got a majority Labour council in Oxford, which has made that commitment. So the big issue, the need for the campaign was actually to spread this beyond the council, so that the council not only paid the living wage itself to its own staff, to the major contractors, but it acted as an advocate in the local business community and said, look, this is what we expect of you. This is your civic duty to pay this to your staff. And that is how the campaign started off. And that is when the whole process of building strong community support around it in the local trade unions, in local community associations, in faith groups, a whole series of different interested parties to try to build this community consensus around the campaign.
And so that's probably a good point to ask. What are some of the successes been? Because it is it's a very broad coalition. You mentioned there, it's not just trade unionists, it's faith groups and community groups. What has that led to some of the successes that you've had, do you think?
Can I just answer that in terms of what's been happening? One of the major challenges we had was getting a lot of employers to sign up to the Oxford Living Wage. So in that context, I would say some of the successes is having employers paying the Oxford Living Wage. We've had award ceremonies, which we've awarded employers that do pay the living wage, but unfortunately, there are not enough of them. We still want more employers to come in and pay the living wage, but also on the basis of where we are mobilizing in terms of the involvement from the students, from the faith groups, from the trade unions. We've had tremendous support over the years where people have come from all sorts of different backgrounds to come and support the living wage. This is one of the beauties of the living wage, that it is a universally supported campaign in terms of people understanding the need that it carries. It has had a gradual small increment over the years. I mean, the last one is £10.31. It was £10.21 last year. We are still, we're always campaigning to see this increase. But also, we're not just campaigning on that, we're campaigning on broader issues that are affecting workers' conditions. We were in the forefront of the what you call the highlighting the issues around the pandemic. I remember one of our first events that we had very early on when there was a struggle around the PPE issues. We organized events around Organize or Die, and we called on various trade unions from the CW to Unite, to NU, NUT, all of them. They came in, we had speakers, they highlighted areas of concern in their areas of organizing where they felt the government had not, armed people with protection in terms of carrying on with their everyday work. But the biggest successes for me over the years was organizing events like to the gig is up, to gig or not to gig, because that was crucial to have a broad umbrella of trade unions embracing that. We were graced by the TUC, Francis O'Grady's presence, along with our now Shadow Chancellor, Annalise Dodds. So it was big. It was really, really an inspiring event for those that were there. So there's been quite a lot of events that we've done, which I'm quite proud of. We had during the pandemic, we didn't stop. We were out there mobilizing around the vaccine, organizing around the women in the pandemic. We really took on a real proactive role in terms of highlighting the issues that are affecting workers in our community in Oxford.
Would it be fair to say building the campaign around that one really clear message, pay people enough to live on, has given you license and authority actually to, as you say, with the COVID stuff, with the PPE stuff, to then actually have a real strong message about other things that are affecting workers in the city?
Yes, it really gave us the strength to build a base so people can understand that we're not only fighting for their health, but we're also fighting for their dignity in terms of the respect that should be afforded to workers. I mean, one of the marches that we had in the summer, which was Oxford Unity, one of the slogans that we had was "Don't just clap, pay our wages," because the workers were concerned that they were risking their lives, and yet the remuneration for what they were doing was not justly deserved. And we are always, highlighting that, and we are forever building capacity. We had the Kill the Bill march. We were out there with our stickers highlighting the issues, and we are forever trying to merge our issues with whatever what you call social justice issues that are raised in Oxford.
Mark, would you like to add to that?
Well, yes. I mean, it's really interesting, and that actually causes sometimes it causes some tensions in the campaign. In that there are some people like me who lack Jabu's flair and style to some considerable degree. We think, well, this is a living wage campaign. Let's try and get the living wage stuff done, right? So I tend to be very narrowly focused. And then Jabu has got this wonderful style and ability to knit together coalitions. So, for instance, last summer, Jabu was talking about some of these issues about, Black Lives Matter and Black livelihoods mattering as well as lives, and broadening some of these coalitions that we originally had, and with a tremendous style and with the authority of an organization that had done a great deal of outreach work. So one of the things, for instance, that we've done is we've translated some of our material into Tetum, which is the language of the East Timorese. And I used to work in the John Radcliffe Hospital. I was a convener there. And one of the things that we found was that there was a hierarchy amongst the low-paid staff. And the poor old East Timorese were the bottom of the worst corner of the hierarchy. They were not merely not paid the NHS lowest wage. They weren't even given contracts with the outsourcing company. They actually had super precarious jobs, subcontractors to subcontractors. It was like circles of hell with these poor old East Timorese and other migrant workers at the bottom, the worst circle of hell. And people used to say to me, well, this group of workers, they can't even afford to rent rooms in Oxford. They actually rent landings, some of them, and they and their family live on a landing. This is actually Victorian levels, Dickensian levels of poverty in this city of bloody spires, right? This is how it survives. This is how people with wealth and privilege and Eton educations come in and waft their way around shopping centres, which are cleaned by an invisible workforce, come into hospitals, get fed by, again, an invisible workforce who are super exploited. This is an appalling truth about Oxford. And I suspect it exists in most of our cities, that we have this invisible, super exploited worker. And as Jabu said, she went on and did some brilliant work with the TUC around the gig economy and built powerful alliances around that, because that is the big loophole with minimum wage or living wage legislation is you can get round it by switching to gig economy type employment. And the other loophole, of course, is apprenticeships. And that isn't just for young people anymore. You can get around paying even the minimum wage by putting people on these apprenticeships. So we know that there are loopholes, and we've got to organise to push back on them.
So I'd be interested to hear more about this issue of apprenticeships. Do you have some examples of that?
Well, if you see the minimum wage legislation, and we're pushing for the real living wage, not the minimum wage as branded by the Tory government as a living wage. But one of the things that we know is that the minimum wage for younger workers is lower again. And then there is a minimum wage for apprentices, which is even lower again. And of course, one of the ways that the government is talking about recovering from the pandemic is to say, oh, well, we're going to offer lots of apprentices. You don't have to be 17-year-olds to apply for apprentices now. You can be 35, you can be 40, you can be 50, and you can apply for apprentice. Well, it was never fair to pay 17-year-olds, half of the minimum wage. And it certainly isn't fair to pay people with heavy family responsibilities, half of even the minimum wage. So this is a huge loophole that needs to be tackled, and through outreach with young people, and to make sure that unemployed people are not, cruelly exploited in the aftermath of the pandemic.
And it's, this idea of this sort of whole invisible cohort of people that essentially are keeping our entire society running. If they go, but there is at the other end of the scale, you've got, and I think it does have a relationship. It is relational to this. And there's certain industries that brilliant working class people should have access to, but they have this sort of tradition of unpaid internships and things like that just cut off whole swaths of professions from people from working class backgrounds. You're both obviously very prominent, very active members of the Socialist Health Association, to say the least. We touched on some of the consequences of the inequality in terms of health and the introduction to this. I wonder if we could go into a bit more detail about that, but what the impacts are on public health from inequality.
From my point of view, living in an area that has been featured very highly in Sir Philip Alston's report as an impoverished area, it's really sort of demoralizing to walk around an area whereby not far from here, about 5 miles down the road, the life expectancy is so great that it's just a culture of despondency, seeing people living in different worlds and two lives of two different types of people's lives being valued at a different level. So that worries me, because I live in that area. So as I go around talking to people, I have been involved in the food distribution during the pandemic. And for people really, really struggling in a first world country, it is absolutely, it's unimaginable. I come from South Africa, and people in those countries have a perception of Europe being at a level whereby if I was to tell them that there were people starving in the UK, they will absolutely, they have this perception that the streets are paved in gold. I mean, even though that the social media has exposed so much, and we virtually live in each other's dining rooms now, but people still have that kind of, they hold Europe in high regard, and to have areas that are being left behind in such a, and the worst part of it is knowing that people are working hard, low-paid workers are working hard just to make ends meet, working long hours, antisocial hours, not having time to spend with their families, not having time to educate themselves properly. For me to have even been asked to come and chair the living wage campaign, it's something that's virtually unheard of, because you don't get that kind of mobility in terms of the working class people heading a lot of organizations, as I have been, doing. So it's been really, really critical and important to empower people living in these communities, so that we start to care about ourselves. We are treated with dignity. We are valued in terms of what we do and what we offer in this society.
Mark, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with Jabu's points. I mean, it is quite shocking, the health inequalities in the city and the child poverty, and as she says, I mean, the fact that the United Nations had to send a special rapporteur to this country to report on the poverty in this astonishingly wealthy society which is not only wealthy at the moment, but has generations of wealth extracted from across an empire for exploitation throughout the world. I mean, it is just astonishing, the levels of inequality here. And I mean, one of the interesting things that we have done as the Socialist Health Association is look at some of the questions around what the problems are and how you fix the problems. And of course, if you look at the government, what the government has to say about this, it says, well, you better eat a nice low sugar diet, and they say you ought to go out and do a little bit of jogging, and you ought to I don't know, eat high fiber breakfast cereals or whatever. And I'm sure this advice is very good insofar as it goes. But one of the really interesting things that they have found is that to have a longer life, you need to organize. You need to join a trade union. Because one of the pieces of work that has been done in Oxford University that we had a report on was looking at some of the international comparators. And they discovered that people in Britain and the United States are dying, working class people in the United States and Britain are dying younger than they have in the past, and it is getting worse. The improvements in life expectancy have stalled, and they are going backwards amongst some of the groups, particularly the groups in the working class communities and in areas of high unemployment. So the life expectancy is sliding backwards. Child health is sliding backwards in those areas. But there are some areas in the world where this isn't happening. So this isn't inevitable. And the areas where it isn't happening are areas where there is high unionization and high collective bargaining. So instead of people fighting individually with the boss, they are organizing collectively to drive up their wages and their conditions and to force proper housing and council housing in their communities. And so the message is, actually, eat as much bloody sugar as you want to, but for God's sake, join a trade union and get organized and fight, because that is better than a pack of bloody vitamins, right? To make sure you and your family live longer, right? Get out there and fight for your rights, fight for your community rights. And that is stunning that comes from a bloody public health professor in Oxford University, right? So there you go. It just shows you, right, that we do have to organize. We have to stop individualizing health problems. I mean, some people, for instance, say to us, they say, oh my God, there is a terrible mental health crisis going on as a result of this pandemic. And I'm sure that's true. I'm sure if I had some of the conditions that some people had, I would be queuing up for mental health help. But in fact, the problem isn't in my head. The problem is in the society that I live in. that is putting such unbelievable pressure on people that it is causing people to fall apart and to lose all their self-confidence, all their ability to manage. And again, that's how you deal with the mental health crisis. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fund mental health properly, but my God, in this society, I am amazed by the fact that people are as calm and as stable as they are. I certainly wouldn't be able to cope with that situation.
And you mentioned at the beginning the argument to businesses in Oxford, to employers, is, this is civic pride, this is your civic duty to do this. I mean, it should be a cause for national shame, these levels of inequality, shouldn't it? I mean, it's just unsustainable. What do you think the long term? I mean, if we do nothing and it just gets worse and worse and worse, what do you think the long term effect of that will be?
For me, my concern is about the next generation, in a sense that they are growing up in a world which is slowly eroding their rights, civic rights that were won by trade unions. I've recently read a little poster which said, do most people know that they have a weekend and they have less hours because trade unions won that right for people to be able to get a break? Right now, we have agencies in the gig economy, working people ridiculous overworking them hours with no sick pay, no remuneration for their pay, low pay, real exploitation. And it's quite interesting. At the moment, I've been collating some information on early trade union history in South Africa. It's been sort of chatting to my mother about how they organized during the apartheid government in the 70s. And it's been really interesting with Mark talking about organizing and healthy, how she becomes alive. She's not been well, but she becomes alive as she talks about how they challenge this government. They were challenging people who were carrying guns as trade unions. And she talks about the joy of organizing around those conditions. Right now, we're facing a bill that is killing all sorts of form of protest or form of organizing. And we are worried about coming out to actually challenge this. And these people are not even carrying guns. These are our rights. And it's so important that people understand what is at stake. So in terms of the future, the message is clear. We mustn't, we mustn't stop what we're doing. In fact, we must intensify the organizing in our communities. We must empower these areas that are seen as marginalized areas. Right now, we're worried about the invasion of the far right and working classes being influenced around a fascist ideology. The only way that we can overpower these forces is for workers to unite. We are our common enemy is capitalism. Our common enemy is for all of us to unite and be good socialists and care for one another. There's so many things that I keep bringing up to people, because a lot of people don't even understand what socialism is because of the stigma that it's been what you call the media has sort of thrown it around as if it's this vicious force that's going to take. Socialism is about organizing ourselves and trying to get decent standards of living for our workers. And I mean, there's more to it than that. But those are the basic principles that we organize, and we have an egalitarian society that cares for its people, that cares for its workers. There are no throwaway people workers must be respected and be treated with dignity.
Socialism or barbarism?
Yes.
Mark, did you want to add to that?
Well, yes, and again, I very much agree with Jabu's point. But I guess one of the important things that we do is that we recognise that it is difficult to fight back in this society, particularly in this surveillance society, particularly in this society where, when nurses organise a protest in Manchester, the organiser is given a £10,000 fine for demanding. This is really becoming a more and more oppressive society, and it is really everybody's duty to stand up and fight for civil rights in this country. And it sounds amazing saying this, that this should be the responsibility of the labour movement to fight for basic civil rights, but it is so alarming what's happening at the moment. We have to get out onto the streets. We have to protest. And people like, the Socialist Health Association needs to understand that in order to fight the attacks on the NHS, the attacks with gross inequality and health inequalities in our society, we have to have the right to demonstrate. We have to have the right to protest and to occupy buildings, to strike, to fight back. We absolutely need that. So this issue of civil rights isn't simply a question for, this is going to sound insulting now, but this isn't simply a question for Black people to worry about civil rights. This is a question for every single person in Britain to worry about civil rights, including our Black brothers and sisters, but including us white people as well. We have to fight on this battle. This is a really absolutely key battle. We have to win it. We can't allow the state to take control of our lives and to fragment us and to mistreat people the way that they're doing. And one of the things that really astonished me around the gig economy meeting, which Jabu helped to organise, was we knew that the gig economy, the precarious work without proper employment contracts, we knew that was a way of subverting things like a minimum wage or a living wage and so on. And we knew the impact that had on low-paid workers. For instance, Deliveroo workers that are in the news at the moment, some of the Hermes workers who contacted us to talk about their exploitation for delivery services for Amazon and the like. But what amazed me at that meeting was not that the fact that low-paid workers came along and packed the biggest meeting hall in Oxford to talk about that issue, but that university lecturers started standing up and saying, I haven't got a secure contract either. I don't know what's happening month by month. And you think, my God, this disease is spreading throughout the whole of the workforce. It started off on the poorest and the worst treated workers, and it is spreading through the whole. In future, we will have a generation who has got no proper employment, has got no pension rights, no sick pay rights. When they get sick, they can't isolate, as we've seen in the pandemic. We see a brutal society, which is just about how much we can exploit workers. And we desperately need, as Jabu quite rightly says, is to defend our rights, to fight back and to speak out about this. And one of the things we've done with the Socialist Health Association is to urge all of the branches to speak out, to participate in these demonstrations, to defend everybody's civil rights. And actually, the Labour Party should be doing a damn sight more on this as well, and reinforcing this movement.
Couldn't agree more. So just to sort of moving back to the Oxford Living Wage campaign. So if I was a precarious worker, a gig worker in Oxford, and I wasn't yet involved with a campaign or a trade union, what would your advice to me be?
What we have been doing throughout the pandemic, we have been holding workshops on a regular basis on Saturdays, where workers can drop in with their grievances and talk about what is happening, and then basically from there we move on to form our strategies as to how we can give support. But more than anything, we're urging people to mobilize around these issues and build capacity. We have a website, we have Facebook pages. We'd like for people to join the Living Wage campaign so that it has a much more broader perspective in terms of the people that are coming in. But more than anything, not just to join on the Facebook, but we want people to be active. We like to hear from the young. I was so impressed last week at the Kill Bill that so many of the young took our stickers. It would be great one day that I would like to step aside for a young person to come and chair this organization and move it into a direction where the young are conscientious about their working conditions and their pay. It isn't okay that the young people should be growing up in a culture of accepting what is going on. Challenging it's not a crime. It's actually a crime that these type of wages and these type of conditions are existing. The people that won and fought, for instance, in 1889, that the matchstick union, they fought the matchbox strike. If they can come and see what is going on today, they'll be shocked, because they would have been thinking this day and age would be so advanced that now we're going backwards, back to that era where precarious employment was the order of the day, and you didn't know whether tomorrow you'll have a job or the day after, and nobody cared about whether you were injured at work. And it's going to that. I mean, a recent story is that my son is working somewhere. He dropped a huge crate on his steel care top boot that it cracked. And because he's working through an agency, nobody cares about that. And that's an issue that years ago would have been unheard of. The unions would have been there dealing with that issue. So there's so much at stake. So for me, the bottom line, there's no alternative. It's organizing, self-organization.
Mark, did you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I agree entirely with Jabu's point, and that I mean, for me, I mean, the most important thing is to support people when they start fighting back, and because I mean, it is very difficult now, particularly if you're on such small pay. If you want to take strike action or industrial action, you've got no savings to fall back on in order to survive the first days of the strike action. And so really it's important to build solidarity as never before, to give people the power not to be starved back to work when they have the courage to take action against that. And that's one thing that we really want to do with the Living Wage campaign, is to make sure that nobody is hung out to dry or victimized in that sense. And I mean, we had some experience of it with some of the local hire people on the taxi service or the private hire service, where they fought back against their precarious contracts. And we were able to mobilize support amongst the local councillors. We were able to mobilize support from the MP. We were able to build a delegation to go to Parliament to make that point from people, workers who were just joining the GMB, and fought some court cases. And part of the outcome of that has been the partial victory against Uber recently. So it is possible to win, but we need to build a huge community support for people so they don't get They don't get starved out. They don't get forced through just the starvation of their families to go back to work and to expect these terrible conditions. And I mean, personally, my attitude is I'm not a big man for charity, but if workers are standing up and fighting, I think we should all dig deep and make sure that they win. It is so important that they win.
Well, listen, thank you so much for sharing all your experience and passion and wisdom. It's been a real privilege to speak to both of you. Do you have a final, Jabu? Do you have a final message for the people watching this program?
Yes, I mean, my message is clear that, as I've said, at the risk of not repeating myself, we must continue to show solidarity with one another, and campaigns like the Oxford Living Wage need to be supported in every city. We need to show that we respect workers, we respect what they do. We've lost so many BAME people in the front line during COVID. If COVID has not shown us what a precious, what a precious thing a worker is in the times of when we're in need, especially, I don't want to create a hierarchy, but health workers have done so much. And for the government to come back and insult them with the type of pay rise that they said they would give them. We have to, the community must see that we have to stand and together and fight on behalf of these people who protected us, and for all the workers that have been out there. Let's respect them. Let's treat them with kindness and dignity.
Thank you, Jabu. Mark?
Again, spot on, quite right. And if I can give a plug to one particular group of workers in our locality, which is Reading, Thames Valley, where there's a group of workers there who have been on strike through a great deal of the pandemic. They are the outsourced security workers at the Royal Berkshire Hospital. They have been out protesting day after day. Historically, what they probably would be porters in the NHS who had been outsourced and put on security detail to look after the hospital and patients and so on. They have, through the process of outsourcing, again, they have lost so much in terms of sick pay rights, pension rights. They are struggling at the moment to get £12 an hour in Reading, and they have been out there fighting through the whole of the pandemic, socially distanced picket lines that they've been operating, and we really need to up our levels for support for them. I think that the anti-union laws are now forcing them to reballot to be able to maintain their legal strike action. And when that reballoting comes through, we must organise a huge demonstration, huge visits to the picket line to boost them, to make sure that when that contract comes up again in the hospital, that there is such political pressure on those NHS executives and directors that they are forced to bring the service back in-house again and make sure that people have got access to sick pay and pensions, and I hope to God that better than the minimum NHS pay, which is only marginally better than what the private sector is offering. So I think I really hope that we can give that a strong plug as well. And I think they've got an online petition at the moment that people are being asked to sign up with.
We'll share links to that petition in the description. And also, I'd like to extend an invite if they want to come on the show and talk about the strike. That would be great. I think outsourcing, really important issue. Another way that the establishment is another bat that the establishment uses to assault our working class with. Listen, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. It's a really important campaign that you're working on. Really, really interested to hear about all the other aspects of it and all the other things we talked about here tonight. So I would just really urge people, support the Oxford Living Wage campaign. We'll put all the details up in the description. If you can afford to make a donation to them, I know that would be appreciated as well. And we'll put a link on the screen for that. But listen, Mark and Jabu, thank you so much for everything that you do. Hopefully we'll have you back on at some point in the future, and we can talk about some of the other things that we discussed here in more detail. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
So I was really tempted again to use that Tony Benn quote that we keep using in these programs. You know, look at what they do to refugees, and that's what they'll do to the rest of us if they can get away with it. I think our guests tonight, you know, emphasised that quite eloquently on a number of key issues. I mean, what are your thoughts on this week's programme, Kathy?
Well, the two key things that I take away are the overall message, overarching message, socialism or barbarism. Mark and Jabu explained socialism in action locally, in our workplaces, in our communities in Oxford. And the other key points that came out for me were about dignity and empowerment. So, yes, of course, we want a living wage. But then the bigger picture around that is so that we can live a life with bread and roses. You know, it's not just eating. It's not just scraping a living to, what did Mark say, live on a whole family living on a landing because they can't afford a room. You know, we need to feed ourselves, but we also need joy in our lives. We all deserve that. And Jabu powerfully suggested that we absolutely must not forget that. We mustn't take this increased oppression as something that we just have to take on the chin. No, we absolutely have to fight against it. And one of the things that Jabu brought out and Mark reinforced was we have to demonstrate unity and solidarity against capitalism and the growing threat of the far right. Now, that might sound a long way from a living wage campaign, but remember, we are all, the three of us, in the Oxford area. And Oxford is a particular, almost unique example of inequality so close together. You know, almost one street and then the other street, with obscene wealth in such close proximity to deep poverty, which makes it even more sickening. I mean, this deep poverty that we've seen through the Austin report, the Marmot report, is widespread. But it was quite interesting to me that we had an Oxford campaign on where, you know, that sharp division is under people's noses every day.
I think something really important points there. I think something that doesn't get talked about enough, though, is just the absurd purposelessness of this inequality. It's not just that you've got hundreds of thousands of people, you know, in abject poverty and misery and living these really hard lives. It's that at the other end of the scale, these people who have this obscene wealth, it doesn't actually make them happier. I mean, I don't know what the stats are for this country, but I do know that in the States, you get to a certain amount of wealth and then it doesn't do anything more for you. It's just this, but it is making someone else miserable. It is making someone's life intolerable. And I think that's really disgusting and needs to be understood and articulated.
Yeah, it is to keep us in our place. You know, they are the few, the elite, the establishment, who feel that they have got power over the many and can stamp us under their heel. And the passion from Mark and Jabu, it doesn't have to be like that. How important is it to join a trade union? It's fundamental. I was actually at the meeting that Mark mentioned when that report was explained, and it was really eye-opening, the penny dropping, that in countries where trade unionism is strong and collective bargaining is in place, the equation with hunger, these things that you don't think about or put together, these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, suddenly all fall into place. So absolutely, unity, solidarity against capitalism, the growing threat of the far right, and the increasing oppression at all levels of our society by the few against us, the many.
So there you go. If you want to live a longer, happier life, join a trade union. If you see workers in struggle, don't stand idly by. Support them, especially if they're doing precarious gig economy work. Support the Oxford Living Wage campaign. As we said, if you can afford to make a donation, please do that. Please go and check out the links that we put in the description that you can find over on YouTube. And most importantly, do not go gentle into that good night. Watch Educate, Agitate, Organise every Saturday night. Kathy, thank you for joining me.
Solidarity, thank you.